opportunities lost.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think, I mean, we will see that maybe when I talk about
We
this,
will
show, you know, these.
try to start up. Not yet the official live stream, but um, just to have a short break before we start also with the video. And also, I forgot my. Oh, no, I have my glasses. Yes. I think we can start. So, colleagues, friends of the CESAM platform, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you here in het pand, of course, but also for all the participants who follow this session online. On the occasion of the first edition of the CESAM Talks, we are very proud of the number of participants we have, since it's the first session that we organize that way, and both in a hybrid way, so both here as in many places, not even in Belgium, but all around. The CESAM Talks, it's an initiative of the CESAM platform. I will explain a little bit what it is. And this edition is about politics, resistance, and collective action in Latin America. This came into life in close collaboration with the Department of Literary Studies at the Faculty of Arts and Philosophy, and they are here as well. More specifically, with the hard work of Laura Welsh and Professor Ilse Logie. So they are from the Spanish section. So I would say a big gracias to you for this productive collaboration for this first talk. A few words about the CESAM platform. CESAM, it stands for Central and South America, and it's a platform that was established in 2016 as one of the 5 regional platforms of the university. So we have 5 platforms covering each time a region. And of course, CESAM is for Latin America. Together with Professor Peter Goethals and the whole steering board, we work to make this platform flourish, and this in terms of academic achievements, but also in building good networks like we do today, based on trust and friendship. The focus of the CESAM platform is both on internal procedures, so to link professors, researchers, but also students to each other. But we also create a membership with citizens and community of over 250 members. So these are the CESAM members, let's say. And with this group, we organize information sessions about the region like we do today. We map internal activities and existing links with the region of Latin America. We also support students to take part in conferences. We organize missions like we do to Ecuador and Mexico. We also organize next year to go to Colombia, and many times in the presence of the rector or with a group of related professors. But also the diplomatic world is a very important component in the platform in terms of implementing funding schemes, helping with the visa procedure and student recruitment. Still, of course, we have a lot of work ahead for the coming years, and for anything we do, we also invite you, and you're always welcome in the many activities that we organize. So there was a little bit about the CESAM platform. I will now introduce you to the moderator of today. It's Jan de Deken. You know, it was announced Lisa Coudray as the moderator of today, but she fell ill just yesterday. So I'm very, very glad that we can count on my personal friend, Jan, who is here today. So thank you, Jan. Jan studied journalism in the Achtervelde University College here in Ghent, but also international politics at Ghent University. He worked as a freelance correspondent in Rio de Janeiro, and he wrote reports from more than 30 countries, including for Latin America, Brazil, and, for example, El Salvador. His reports have appeared in many journals and books, such as Knack, Ter Zake, Franks, also on the television, the Standaard, De Morgen, so quite some important information channels. As topics, human rights, migration, conflict, and climate are the subjects of his fields of interest. I'm right? Okay. Then in 2019, and with the support of the Flemish Journalism Fund, Jan launched the Polar Project. It's a cross-media and multimedia platform that focuses on innovative, inclusive journalistic storytelling about global warming. I think it's very relevant, also focusing on Latin America in some studies. So I would recommend to visit the Polar Project websites once in a while. It's worth. So I think with this background of Jan, I really believe that he has the perfect skills to lead the session of today into an inspiring and interesting talk with our special speakers of today, Gianfranco Selgas and Luisa Serioli. So Jan, I will give the floor to you now, but I would like to inform you just about one thing. If you see, this is a live stream version of the session, so it's filmed. If you are not comfortable, normally they will not film and film the faces directly. But if you don't feel comfortable with filming, we have seats at the back, and there won't be any camera on. So you can still change while Jan is coming to open the sessions. Thank you very much, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for the beautiful introduction. I'm very sad that the current host couldn't be here, but I'm very happy that I could replace her last minute. Happy to be here. Our CESAM Talks, as I have understood, are not just a one-way street. The idea is not that there will be a lecture and that's it. The idea is that we will all debate about these really interesting topics today, topics that I think are extremely relevant, touching on energy, touching on mining, very relevant, among the most relevant topics, I think, now and in the decades to come, with the climate crisis and all the environmental problems we're facing, with the political situation that we're in. Let's all talk about it in about 40 to 50 minutes from now. Keep your questions and remarks ready for after the lectures of our two guests. In today's session, we're focusing on Venezuela's oil extraction and Venezuela's oil culture, as we'll understand, and how the development of the petrostate connects to current extractivist projects and policies still. We will also look at the links between the domestic arena of extractivist societies and the international stage. Our speakers today are Gianfranco Selgas and Luisa Serioli. Luisa is a researcher. Since Gianfranco will be the first lecturer, maybe you can just stand up for a moment and people can see you already. Thank you so much. Luisa is a researcher at the extractivism.de collective from the universities of Marburg and Kassel, both in Germany. The project looks at the trans-regional and interdisciplinary conceptualizations of extractivist societies in Latin America and in the Middle East. Luisa currently works as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Kassel, and she builds a comparative research project concerning three major oil countries, Venezuela, Algeria, and Saudi Arabia, focusing on the interlinks between international relations, economic development, and domestic politics. She has a PhD in political science at the Center for Near and Middle East Studies at the University of Marburg, and she holds a Master in International Relations and Comparative Foreign Policy from the University of Brasilia in Brazil. And next to Luisa, we have Gianfranco Selgas. You can. Gianfranco is a British Academy postdoctoral fellow at University College London. Prior to joining UCL, he was a postdoctoral researcher at the Nordic Institute of Latin American Studies at Stockholm University. And his research focuses on environmental humanities, cultural studies, and political ecology in Latin America and the Caribbean. Last year, his academic work on the history of Venezuela's extractive zones was awarded the Best Article on Venezuela Award by the Latin American Studies Association. And in November, Gianfranco is organizing a workshop in Stockholm that will serve as the kickoff for a research network formed by researchers in different domains who work on mining, energy, and cultural political issues in the Americas. So in November, let's all go to Stockholm. But first, today, let's focus on Venezuela. Gianfranco, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jan. Appreciate it. Right, thank you so much. Let me get the mic here. All right, just want to thank Barbara, Laura, and Ilse for organizing the event. I really appreciate the invitation and, of course, being here talking to you, to Luisa, and John for the moderation. I'll just jump right to it. There we go. All right, so in 1979, Venezuelan poet, writer, and critic Juan Lizcano managed to summarize in just a couple of words the irremediable Venezuelan symbiosis between the human and the environment. Venezuelans, writes Lizcano, lack an unmistakable sign of identification, of precise, sharp, own, and world-renowned features, except for oil. In the first decades of the 20th century, Venezuela had begun to take the definitive steps for its historical structuring as a petrostate. That's a typification given to countries where government revenues depend heavily on the export of oil and natural gas, where economic and political power is highly concentrated in a minority elite, and where political institutions are weak and unaccountable, as well as being immersed in widespread corruption schemes. The birth of the oil industry in Venezuela coincided with the efforts of Juan Vicente Gómez, dictator of the Republic in different periods between 1908 and 1935, to consolidate control over a fractured national and political system. In his attempt to reduce the power of regional elites, Gómez succeeded in asserting the national government's authority, sustained by the economic benefits of the transnational oil companies established in Venezuela after the exploitation of the first fossil fuel deposits in 1910. As a matter of fact, 11 years later, that's in 1922, the Royal Dutch shale geologists at La Rosa, or Barroso II, as you see in the slide, that's a field in the Maracaibo Basin in East Venezuela, struck oil, which blew out an extraordinary rate of 100,000 barrels per day. It's back in the day, right? In a matter of years, more than 100 foreign companies, primarily the Royal Dutch Shell, Gulf, and Standard Oil, were controlling the oil market backed by Gómez and making Venezuela second only to the United States in total output by 1929. By the time Gómez died in 1935, oil took over other sectors of the economy to account for 90% of exports. Gómez's successors sought to reform the oil sector to funnel funds into government coffers, and an example of that is the Hydrocarbons Law of 1943, which in a way did that. And what happened was that foreign companies were required to give half of their profits to the state. And by doing that, the government income increased sixfold. So the symbiotic relationship forged between the oil industry and the state gave Gómez and following Venezuelan presidents political legitimacy and economic resources to consolidate and lay the foundations for the rentier model that characterized the Venezuelan petrostate throughout its history. For Venezuela, the eruption of oil implied a rapid transition from an agriculture exporting economy to an energy and mineral exporting power. This forced the nation to rethink its relationship with nature, and it changed everything. As scholar Miguel Campos says, analyzing the pictures you are seeing right now, the discovering of oil brings, in the case of the Sumac Hacienda, what you see here, a change in the country, right? So the year is 1914, and as Campos puts it, and I'm quoting Campos here, these pictures summarize the encounter between nature and titanium, end quote. So these photographs record the moment technology burst into a barely inhabited place. It shows a set of socio-ecological dynamics that would transform Venezuela forever, changing its relationship with capitalism and modernity. This is explained masterfully by Venezuelan scholar Fernando Coronil as he describes how, and I quote, the entity called Venezuela came to be seen as constituted not only by its people, but also by its main source of wealth. That is, not just by its social, but by its natural body as well, end quote. This process became more robust in the 1950s during Marcos Pérez Jiménez's military dictatorship. Between 1952 and 1958, de facto spectacular modernity took place, and this is to use scholar Lisa Blackmore's words, was installed in the country by articulating oil revenues with the construction and modernization of urban infrastructure. This process was imbued by constant fabulation. That is, it used the revenues from oil extraction, the petrodólares, the petrodollars, to transplant symbols of progress such as hotels, highways, and skyscrapers, but also housing and urban infrastructure onto Venezuelan soil. Through this impressive deployment of development, oil revenues were equated with modernity, and the role of Venezuelans shifted from actors to spectators of modernization. Despite the fall of the dictatorship in 1958, Venezuela's spectacular modernity was sustained during the first 2 decades of democratic governments, that's between 1960 and the 1970s, due to the high prices of petroleum exports. Subsequently, factors such as the 1973 international oil crisis, the weaknesses of the import substitution model, corruption, and Venezuela's Bolivar, the currency of the country, crisis in 1983, caused the slowdown of the country's spectacular modernity, which would, of course, experience a revival during Hugo Chávez's time for a couple of years in the 2000s. However, the discovery and exploitation of oil will not only lay the foundations of the rentier and monoproductive model that we see in contemporary Venezuela, it would also give free rein to all kinds of fantasies induced by the official idea that oil and mineral extraction would give the country the definitive push for its instant modernization. Put differently, these activities embrace the production and import of goods, but also encompass the social agents involved in the process of production, unifying in a single field the material and cultural orders upon which the idea of the Venezuelan nation was built. The rentier model strengthened Venezuela's economic, political, and social basis, reinforcing the interrelationship between a productivity pattern and the imaginary idea of endless growth as threads in constructing the national identity. In this way, the development discourse built around the extraction of fossil fuels and minerals in Venezuela transcended its political framework. It became, so to speak, a master narrative, right? Shaping the organization of Venezuelan society and its political and cultural regimes as repositories of infinite material possibilities. Now, this, I argue, will sustain the imaginary of endless growth that is anchored in the socio-ecological construction of the Venezuelan state and the Venezuelan people. And even though Venezuela's oil industry has been in decline for quite some time due to several reasons, among them, mismanagement, corruption, governmental policies, and on top of that, the international economic and oil embargo, the magical, and I want to stress that idea, the magical properties of oil still linger on. I'll be back to this magical thing in a bit. So now, looking at the images I've been showing you so far, I am interested in highlighting an aspect that I consider useful to think about the dynamics through which critical cultural theory, political ecology, and the energy humanities can help us debunk and critically engage with the symbolic and material imaginaries of Venezuela and what I would like to call here the cultures of extraction. This starts from a relatively simple idea that permeates the historical and contemporary background of the country. That is, the imaginary articulation of oil and, as we will see in short, minerals as materials embedded with magical properties. Their magical property is their transformation into the transformation of oil into modernity, money, technology, and the insertion or reinsertion today of Venezuela in the global market. Under that magical spell, as we call it at the very beginning, under that magical pretext that co-opts oil, minerals, and culture, Venezuela has embodied the naturalization of wealth and the idea that wealth exists directly in nature. That's why I understand the magical, according to the conceptualization proposed by Colonial, whose starting point is that the premise that the West has defined its position vis-a-vis nature as that of a miracle worker. Understood as a miracle worker, the human subordinates nature as a powerless material. However, what really happens in the human production of miracles is a symbolic change, in this case, from oil to money, transfiguring the social agents involved in that process. As Coronel shows with Venezuela's case, while the state has presented itself as the miracle worker that could turn its domination of nature into a source of historical progress, the reality is that the Venezuelan state has been limited to producing increasingly precarious acts of magic, while its power only comes from the powers of oil money subjected to the fluctuations in the international market. Right, so nowadays, and this is a jump in time, we can see a similar pattern in a somewhat similar form of commodification of nature. With an extension of 112,000 square kilometers, the Arco Minero del Orinoco, or Orinoco Mining Arc, OMA, a strategic mining area to exploit reserves of gold, diamonds, coltan, copper, and other rare minerals in the Venezuelan Amazon, currently accounts for the 12% of the country's territory. This was instituted by executive decree on February 24, 2016. The OMA is an example of the socio-environmental impact produced by development policies and the attempt to seek outlets for a declining oil economy. According to scholar Antulio Rosales, the oil price crisis in 2014 and the imposition of international sanctions on Nicolás Maduro's administration have led the Venezuelan state to implement a radicalization of the rentier model. The state has progressively expanded its extractive frontiers from oil and gas towards intensive mining and the extraction and issuance of cryptocurrencies backed by crude oil and gold to exploit subsoil minerals elements in connection with global financial circuits. This radicalization of the magical state has transformed the traditional rentier structure that sought, as we saw at the beginning, to maximize economic benefits through royalties and taxes on oil, into one that expands and deepens the sources of rent capture in the process of appropriation and exploitation of the subsoil. Historically, the Venezuelan Amazon has alternated between neglect and attention by the national and regional governments. Although the OMA has its president in the opening of the Imataca Forest Reserve in the jurisdiction of the states of Bolívar and Del Tamacuro in southern Venezuela. This was by decree by the government of Rafael Caldera in 1997. The exploitation project was taken up again during the government of Hugo Chavez and executed by the Maduro administration. Although official statements by Venezuela's Ministry for Ecological Mining Development refer to the OMA, and I'm quoting here, as a model of responsible mining, end quote, the mega mining ventures' environmental, social, and ecological costs are dire. These are especially poignant in terms of the constant degradation of ecosystems, health crises resulting from the use of toxic substances like mercury, the one you use to extract gold, right? The flourishing of illicit businesses involving mafias, the military, and guerrillas, as well as systematic human and non-human rights violations and sovereignty problems. So embedded in this dynamic, the Venezuelan Amazon has turned into an extractive zone, a zone of extraction, right? A region transformed by extractive capitalism where the violence inherited by colonial modes of exploitation subjugates life into commodities. So as mentioned, the conflictive relationship between capitalism, modernization, and the environment is embedded in Venezuela's symbolic and material imaginaries. A long-durée issue, as probably many of you know, that's been experienced in Latin America, and it has exacerbated in our present day. So this was a video that actually didn't work, so I'm just going to jump to the next part, which is the last part of my presentation. So what I would like to do now is a conceptual transition between the images I have been showing you so far and another set of more artistic-oriented images while I approach, as I said, the conclusion of my presentation. And I will do these as means to draft a way to think about oil and minerals from a critical perspective. And I mean, we don't have enough time to do it, but I will try to at least speculate with possible ways and paths to dismantle, right, this spell and the imaginaries of oil and minerals in Venezuela. Right. So through sculptural assemblages, objects, industrial waste, engines, sounds, lights, and photographs, the work of contemporary Venezuelan artist Ana Alenzo, and you've seen Alenzo's installations here, reveals the tricks of the art of magic, right? And it allows us to understand Venezuelan history as part of a planetary history, a dynamic that concerns socio-ecological relations with geological and mineral formations, and also with our daily interaction with energy, right, that comes from oil and other minerals. So when you look at pieces like Oil Interventions, or Lo que la mina te da, la mina te quita, which loosely translates at what the mine gives, the mine takes away, even other works by Alenzo that I will show you in a bit, Desviar la Inercia and Mad Rush, it confronts us, or they confront us, with the social and environmental consequences connected with what scholar Jason Moore describes as the web of life, right? That's nature understood as a whole, as a flow of flows where the human being makes the environment and the environment makes the human being. It is an artistic work that returns to the geomaterial source of our subject of discussion this afternoon to reveal the very essence of the act of magic, of the illusion. This magical operation of oil and minerals can be grappled as a dynamic inherent in how the ways in which we understand fossil fuels and minerals, such as gold or lithium, no longer have to do with their commodity value or instrumental power to propel modernity, but also with understanding them as an essential component for the configuration of social, cultural, and political formations. And I'm saying this in the good and the bad way. The growth, availability, and accessibility of our fossil fuels and various minerals has been instrumental in ensuring the sustained progress of humanity and capitalism. Both modern history and our daily lives are saturated with events and objects produced directly or derived from petroleum and other minerals. And yet, the narrative and visual representation and conceptualization of these elements that we can start calling a culture of oil or a culture of extraction have been wrongfully subjugated to only acts of magic by the state. To simplify the idea, and using here Imre Seman's words, these have been put out of sight in history. We don't see them, but they are part of us, right? So in that sense, Alenzo's work not only places us within the extractivist cultural imaginary that involves those acts of magic, It also mobilizes art as a creative vehicle and communicator of narratives and collectives' identity to enable different experiences and activisms. And I would just stop here to show you very quickly a video while I'm talking, which is that one. Right, guys? That's the way it works? There you go, okay. So let me just rephrase that. So art also mobilizes as a creative vehicle and communicator of narratives and collective identities to enable different experiences and activisms. This, in turn, devises new ways of life to oppose forms of naturalization that deny the environmental crisis and promote forms of silencing the consequences of extractivism. And this is important because the art that dialogues and critically discusses the environmental crisis allows us to rethink its political potentiality to reflect on socio-ecological relations. And art that thinks geomaterially and socio-ecologically also allows us to think about the relationships between geological forces and the social practices of petrocapitalism to the political geologies that organize and capture geoforces as a mode of energy accumulation. This is simplified by geographer Catherine Jusov in her concept of the geosocial stratum to examine the expression of social forms as a product of geological forces in the era of the human being as a force of geological change, the Anthropocene, as you know, and as a legacy of colonial geologics, or the Capitalocene, as probably you guys know also. So, and this is, I'm concluding with this. It is striking to me how little attention has been paid to cultural production that systematically addresses the Venezuela extractivism relationship as a country in which, as I said at the very beginning, the extraction of oil and now minerals has determined the economy, political changes, large and small transformations of social life, and even various cultural and mental archetypes. By attempting to conclude my talk with this brief aesthetic digression, and I apologize if it doesn't make much sense, I think of these artistic works as pieces that make up an archive that speculates about our present and our futures without disregarding the past. At the same time, it invites us to think of the historical articulation of the oil imaginary as an extractivist imaginary of epistemological, historical, political, and geological displacements and landslides. Lastly, the magical illusion that articulates the naturalization of wealth and the idea that wealth exists directly in nature is not only part of the Venezuelan extractive logic, but is part of our planetary inheritance, a planetary mind, so to speak, or the essence of the cultures of extraction. And I will stop here. And I think if you want to continue watching the video, it's not that long, so it will stop in a bit. So thank you so much. I appreciate the attention. Thank you. Right, sorry, I'm going to stop it. I think it's, there you go.
Thank you so much, Gianfranco. It didn't make me feel super positive about our planetary mind, but no, it was really interesting. I think Luisa was really interested too, because I saw her taking a lot of notes. Very curious for her presentation, a multi-causal approach to grasp Chavismo.
We'll need some water. Theoretically, it's just continue, right? I'm just going to leave the clock here for me. Okay, there's a typo in my name, but it was already mentioned a lot. So today I am presenting a little bit more how to understand Chavismo goals and understandings of development. So in a way that we can escape extremisms on explaining the crisis, on blaming just one side, blaming other side. I want to show that there are many different international, regional, and domestic events that happened throughout the development of Chavismo that led to a change of understanding what development is and how oil is part of a changing of development. So I work at Extractivism. We are our German project between two German universities. And our goal is to define extractivist societies and go a little bit beyond area studies and compare countries from different regions. So our work now is comparing Latin America and Middle East. We explore different resources, not only oil, but my part of the research are oil countries, as was already presented. And, well, there is no point of me even to try to explain this question because you already did the work for me. When Venezuela can be considered a classic case of understanding what is an extractivist society, in which the sense of belonging to a nation is completely connected to the resource that is being extracted from the nature. So inter-society, and state-society relations are surrounded this idea of this magical resource that we can take wealth out of nature and through that develop. And so oil is key for this concept of development. And what is development? Is development just this modernity that Gianfranco presented us, or is different perceptions or different understanding of this idea of development? But for a long time, the trajectories of Venezuela, independently with the government, has been to answer this question. El petróleo es nuestro, so the oil is ours. How can it redirect to the development of our society? And what I do in my research is that I look into economic transformation plans. So top-down from the government plans of explicitly trying to change a sectorial, to make a sectorial change on the economy of a country. So that's what I'm doing in my research. How I compare the three countries is through analyzing those economic plans. Today I'm going to discuss the evolution of the economical plans of Chavismo. So from the first one done by Chavez until the most recent one from Maduro. And the idea is that those economical transformation plans, they represent the ambitions of a country to abandon certain patterns of underdevelopment or for resource-rich nations to escape this middle income trap that they tend to be in. And those plans, because they're promoting a vision, they tend to need societal approval and political appeal, and they are very broad and top-down in the sense that the goals are always going beyond economic. They're always inviting the society to participate on this vision, this new project. So they have different levels within it, different ambitions, political, ideological, cultural, societal, not only economical. What I'm looking is, what are the factors that have made those projects change, and the priorities between political, ideological, economical, cultural are changing within. So if transformation implies sectorial change for countries that we define as extractivist society, the major question is extractivism to what? And that's the main question of our project in more general. We are a bunch of researchers, not only me, is how can extractivist societies escape, if they are willing to, the extractivism trap or the rentier trap. And I'm looking into these projects to understand what they consider, the paths to do it, and how the priorities of trying to escape from extractivism change accordingly to different scenarios and contexts. So when it comes to Venezuelan development path, well, it doesn't change too much from Latin America in the sense of ambitions. 50s and 60s, as Gianfranco already mentioned, there was a project of import substitute industrialization. Like the rest of Latin America, Venezuela did not escape the neoliberalism wave in the 80s, 90s, and well, that brought to economic crisis, general dissatisfaction. One of the symbols of the general dissatisfaction was the Caracazo protest, and that is when the figure of Hugo Chavez emerges as the political solutions for the crisis that the country was in, this neoliberal wave. It's important to mention that Chavez, when he raised to power, he had higher popularity. His leadership skills were very, you can admire his leadership skills in to collect a broad political settlements, in the sense of the very different groups, including even the private sector, were supporting his rise to power in the beginning. His main goals has always been to promote a more participative democracy, and he was very keen on anti-imperialism rhetoric and escaping the unipolarity of United States. And he had a very clear, and we have to think this is 98 when he rose to power, a very clear anticipation of a rising multipolarity, in the sense that the United States were going to soon end this unipolar moment and other countries would emerge. And by that, it would create an opportunity for regions like Latin America to escape this imperialism. And so this narrative was very important on his agenda. And then we have the first Chavista Development Plan, 2001, which is the Plano Nacional de Desarrollo Económico y Social de la Nación, which the main focus of this plan was to build the Bolivarian democracy, which would be a democracy that is participative. And it based on this idea of equilibriums. There are 5 equilibriums, and they are based on the idea of promoting sustainable growth, creating more equal societal opportunities, citizen engagement, and foreign policy diversification to reduce dependency on the United States. The idea of the Bolivarian democracy is this: sembrar el petróleo would be socially. So oil would be used to improve the quality of life and create more equal opportunities for the Venezuelan society. It is very explicit on this plan a goal of getting away from rentier society into a productive society. Those lines are on the plan over and over again, so there was this sense of sectorial transformation. Natural resources should be protected, conserved, but at the same time be used for national development. So it's a new returning to this idea of using oil to modernize, but always with a narrative that is not only modernize with those massive projects that we were seeing in the presentation before, but to improve the quality of especially the poor Venezuelans that had been excluded, that has been, as I even noted, the sentence that you presented became just a spectator of modernity. And it's very clear on the plan a goal of reducing the power of traditional elites. However, when you read the plan, it's clear to see that Chavez had an expectation that with his vision, he would convince these traditional elites to join within his project. There is very much citations of state and private initiative for diversification. The idea of agrarian reform was just for specific unproductive lands. So there was an interest on trying to connect with the elites and do this new Bolivarian democracy. Also very important, this vocation of integration of the country. Venezuela saw itself, Chavez saw Venezuela, better to say that, as a center to connect Latin America, Caribbean, and the Andean region, and create an integration that was much more south-south driven, less south-north driven. Well, then we have the first externalities. And my whole presentation is going to be like that. I present the plan, I show things that happen, and the next plan, how the next plan reflect those externalities that happen between the plans. So the first externality, it is a domestic one, was the April 2002 coup. Basically, it was a strike on the national oil. We can discuss this later. I'm not going to explain what was the coup. But the long-term consequence of the coup is that the traditional elites were out of the decision-making for Chavez. So this perception that those groups could actually participate on the development project, of this vision of the Bolivarian society, is out. Main part of the military breaks with the elite, bringing Chavez back to power. Chavez take control of PDVSA, of the national oil industry. So he took out all the technocrats that used to work there to put people that are connected to loyal people to his party. And because the United States were very quickly to support the coup that was organized by PDCámara's representative, which is represent the private sector, it is in this point that we can see a clear break or a clear mistrust from the Chavez politicians to United States and to the private sector. The second externality is a regional externality, is the rise of the pink tide. So a rise in the 2003, 2005, a rise of a lot of left-wing or left-inclining governments in Latin America. This kind of support Chavez's perception of multipolarity and the goal of integration of the region. So South-South discourses, South-South integration, emerging countries, all of this becomes bigger and bigger, which it increases this let's break the imperialism problem or curse of Latin America. That is when ALBA, CARICOM, Petrocaribe, UNASUR, Mercosur get started. They have a reboost. In case of Mercosur, is a reboost. All the others were created in this period. The soft power of Chavez in OEA is very interesting to look at, and also how it becomes much more critical to countries that have stronger ties with the United States, particularly Colombia. And the third externality is international, which is the 2000s oil price rise. A lot of petrodollars, a lot of rents start coming in to Venezuela. It was a lot of money. Whenever you ask somebody about this, how the management, and I think that's what that image was trying to show in your videos, that it was a lot of money that came in. And PDVSA, which now is in the hands of political allies, become a pipeline for social projects. I'm not going to talk here the effectiveness or not of the social project, but PDVSA becomes a pipeline to transfer rents to social projects, particular misiones, but also other funds of development, to redistribute and kind of overcome traditional bureaucracy, traditional elites of Venezuela. And of course, this work is loyalty building. And in terms of international relations, PDVSA also becomes a pipeline for petrodiplomacy, in the sense of strengthening alliances, particularly with Caribe, particularly even more with Cuba, through selling oil and sending money. Running in parallel, I say, here is like a situation that the scenario is changing. Of course, this oil price rise symbolized also a commodity boom, which meant that China was becoming a huge actor in Latin America. The same time, the United States is reducing its dependency on importing oil because of the oil that they found there. And so this kind of like consolidates Chavez's perception that yes, multipolarity is the thing. Unipolarity is ending in Latin America. We can do partnerships beyond with the United States. But at the same time, PDVSA start having technicians problem, I would say that, by this getting out the traditional but specialized capital that used to work in PDVSA. We start seeing here the point that the efficiency of PDVSA in extracting and producing oil start slowly going down. That's going to, of course, become completely visible by the time that the oil prices are down. It's important to cite here that this is the first U.S. sanctions start coming here. They are military, they are involving issues of narco traffic, but is already creating a very complicated relationship between Chavismo and United States. Then it comes the second development plan, which is the Proyecto Nacional Simón Bolívar. This is where the Chavez socialism of the 21st century arrives. I'm not going to say what I understand of it. I think I don't understand too much, because if you read the project, it's very confusing, this conceptualization of what is the productive socialist model. However, it becomes very clear on this plan that the economical project goes a little down. Priority is political, is to consolidate this new socialist of Venezuela. There is no more citations of interest in cooperating with the private sector. This is gone on this new plan. Development of strategic sectors, and whatever is the strategic sectors is very broad, but all the energy sectors are considered strategic, of course. They should be state-centric. There is no more interest in collaborating with traditional elites. Opposition and traditional elites are completely excluded on the project. So you see on the project the clear political polarization that has been developed since the coup of 2002. Fourth externality then is the drop in oil prices. So prices drop starting 2011. And what it becomes clear when the money starts coming in is that the diversification did not work. This goal of Chavismo was using oil to leave oil, to transform the sector, to transform the economy into something productive and not only extractive, did not work. The dependency on rents actually increased. All the social programs are dependent on those incoming money. Then it becomes very obvious the level of corruption and mistrust and mismanaged, not only in PDVSA, but also within the misiones, also within those social projects. And then we arrive in scenarios of crisis of imports and crisis of supply. So the window of opportunity, it's completely closed by the end of abandoning extractivism, of at least reducing the dependency of these rents, is completely gone. And then there is a parallel externality, which is domestic, which is the death of Chavez. It was the Chavismo movement then managed to transform this in a national trauma, creating this hero image on Chavez. But then we have the rise of Maduro, and whoever you ask about Maduro political surroundings, the first answer you always have to have is Maduro is not Chavez. He doesn't have the ability, the popularity, the leadership skills that Chavez had. Also very important, he's not a military. So what I used to say here is that political settlement get condensed. Who belongs to Chavismo and the liberties of intellectual political tendencies within Chavismo reduces a lot in order to guarantee Maduro holds on power. Military grows in power. They also get much more political, economical involvement, especially on mining sectors. There is much more political repression. There is conflict within Chavismo. If you disagree with Maduro, you are out of Chavismo also, even if you were a Chavista. So the social legitimacy of the movement in itself reduces a lot. By 2014, 2015, we are in an economical collapse, immigration waves, flood in Latin America. Venezuela becomes a regional issue. So it becomes a topic that all the other countries of Latin America are talking about. Then we have the third development plan, which is the Plan de la Patria. Basically, it's very similar to the first one. Is much more mythified, messianic tone with this image of our leader that just died and we're going to follow the path of Chavez. So there is this evocation of Chavez, the hero, when you read the documents. It's very nostalgic. Anti-imperialism becomes the main focus to fight the imperialism of the United States, because there is already a much worse perception through Chavez. Foreign policy is very much multicentric, multipolar. Actually, what he's talking about here is to focus foreign policy with actors that are ideologically close to our anti-imperialism narrative. Economic recovery is completely abandoned on this project. It talks that recovery is coming. There is no discussion of a strategy of how the economy recuperation is going to come. It comes, when you read the documents, and those are pages, like they are this size, each of them, it's very clear. First, we establish the socialist system, and then we tackle and fix the economy. Or even better yet, if we establish socialism, the Bolivarian socialism, economy will be fixed. That's the narrative. So then we arrive on the sixth externality, which is international, which is the other types of sanctions. By 2014, the sanctions focused on human rights and much more on individuals. 2015, also in other individuals, but much more on politics, especially with the presidential crisis of 2019, which the opposition now has a window of opportunity via Guaido. Guaido declared himself as international interim president. They managed to gather a lot of international support. Here is very important to stress the Venezuelan lobby in Washington and Florida, the power that they have, the connection they have with Guaido opposition. So then if I mention that the immigration crisis transformed Venezuela in a regional issue, the polarization of Venezuela becomes an international issue by 2019, in the sense that we saw countries being forced to pick a side. Are they which president they are having ties, which presidents they're having alliance? So then you have this this image. And in parallel, the externality 7 is the conservative wave in Americas. So if we had the pink tide in the 2000s, in the 2010s, we have a bunch of right-wing or even much more radical right-wing being elected in Latin America. That means that the South-South discourse lose ground. You don't talk anymore about South-South. Because those leaderships are interested in North-South relationship much more. You see a lot of the integration projects being completely shattered or at least weakened. Nobody talks about UNASUR anymore. Nobody talks about Mercosur anymore. So in order to keep the political narrative of Chavismo, we see a much stronger foreign policy that is anti-unipolarity based. Iran, Russia, India, China, but Iran, Russia, very much important, especially also Cuba and Russia when it comes to partnerships of intelligence and military. And when we talk about conservative wave, I put in the Americas because, of course, we have Trumpism and Trumpism. Because Trump, as he did with all the US enemies, there was a new type of pressure, this maximum pressure, this idea of all possibilities are on the table, this very threatening narrative towards the countries that are US enemies. And here is important to remember, I just mentioned about the lobby in Florida. Venezuela became a platform for Republicans on the United States. So we have the image, for example, of Marco Rubio, but it's not only that. So it is a narrative, Trump do a new type of pressure, new type of sanctions, which is the sanctions on the oil industry. So it's not only in individuals now, but it's on people that wants to buy oil companies to a point that, buy Venezuelan oil, to a point that you have even Russian companies that were, don't remember the name of the company right now, Rosneft, whatever, I don't remember, sorry. But refineries, even Russian refineries in India that was refining Venezuela petroleum. Let's remember, Venezuelan petroleum is very thick, is not very good quality. In refining, the industries that are capable of refining, majority of them are in the United States. They cannot take the oil anymore. There is a bunch of frozen assets in the United States from the Venezuela, in particular Citgo. So all the international companies that were still in Venezuela, they leave. Then we arrive on the the ongoing development plan, which is the Proyecto Nacional Simón Bolívar from 2019-2025. It is much more aggressive. When you read, the plan is to fight an economic war. Aggressive in the sense of we are being attacked, we need to defend our sovereignty. United States, those sanctions on our oil is the source of all of our problems. If we fight this fight, and we need to fight this fight by protecting our independence, we will indeed resolve Venezuelan problems. So you don't read anything anymore about ideas of economic transformation, sectorial transformation. The only thing that is new, and that's why I put interrogation point, because it's just out there, but it's confused to understand what is their understanding of it, is that eco-socialism is at the forefront. This idea of promoting eco-socialism in Venezuela and protect and do a protection of nature, which is super contradictory when we see what is happening in Orinoco, for example. So my interpretation is that this is a way to actually just confront the international and capitalism in general. So it's possible to say today, we are in 2022, that the crisis with Guaido is strengthened somehow Maduro grasp on power. Because Guaido popularity today in Venezuela is quite low also. Maduro also, but their popularity both sides is low. People blame this whole polarization crisis going to international, to the frozen assets, the companies leaving, the fact that oil is not being sold anymore. So the imperialism discourse is still quite strong. We would say the opposition today, the window is closed to this opposition within Venezuela. That's my interpretation talking with people. But repression is key. Cuba assistance in counterterrorism is the main, I forgot to mention, but it should be here. Not only Cuba assistance in counterterrorism is one of the main foreign policy direction of this now Maduro government, but also partnerships with Turkey and Iran, countries that has been for decades learning how to do sanction evasion as a way to avoid those sanctions, and they all trained that because Iran is being sanctioned since the 70s. So you see, it's as an anecdote, but Iran sends its oils, which is much more refined, to Venezuela to mix with Venezuelan oil, mix that, send back to Turkey or Emirates, and that sells to China. So those situations are happening a lot. And also interesting to pinpoint that COVID helped the repression. People took it out of the streets because of the crisis. And the role of China and Russia as support, sending the vaccines, giving assistance, improve also and strengthen even a little bit more this narrative of anti-imperialism being equal anti-Americanism. And then here, I'm so sorry I passed my time, But here's my final slide, which I bring the context today. So I'm not calling them externalities, but I'm putting 3 interrogation points for being discussed. This idea of multi-causal factors always happening at the same time, pushing to different directions what is considered development for Chavismo. In the first 3 points is in international priorities on oil. We had always been talking about a transition of oil for the last couple of years. Of course, Ukraine crisis, remember us that we're still very much dependent on those resources. But if an energy transition actually is pushed forward, even though Venezuela has that amount of oil, it's not the oil that people are that much interested right now because of the level of pollution, the quality that it is, and also the fact that the infrastructure of PDVSA is extremely in decay. It would need a lot of money to actually extract more the oil that Venezuela used to be extracting. For example, Brazil today is extracting more oil than Venezuela, even though having much less. So in terms of infrastructure, is very interesting. Again, we come to what you talked much better than me, the idea of gold mining and other extractivist resource coming to the table. Is Venezuela an extractivist society that is just changing which product it's going to be extracting in the future? So how is Venezuela is going to play with the shifting international priorities of oil? And even though Ukraine crisis improved the scenario for a lot of oil countries like Saudi Arabia or Algeria, it's not for Venezuela, because now China can buy gas and oil from Russia for lower prices because Russia is being sanctioned, so nobody wants anymore the oil of Venezuela. It's too expensive, also the transit, right? When it comes to the other point is authoritarian capitalism. Antulio, that you mentioned, is working on that. This idea that nowadays, you do everything in Venezuela by dollar. Maduro is liberalizing a lot through dollarification of the economy, and there is this emergence of a new private sector, and is a new private sector connected to Chavismo. A lot of corruption, a lot of authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is maintaining itself, but the economy is improving slowly. Venezuela of today is not Venezuela of 2015, for example. And the third point that I would like to pinpoint is that the regional system is not the same that helps so much in terms of soft power, in terms of narrative of Venezuela. We are seeing an emergency new or 2.0 left in the region. I would be happy to say that Brazil joined the team today, but we didn't yet. So, but it's not only that, this seems to be a much weakened, much less integrative or much less focused on the regional integration left that is emerging. And also you have this new left coming, for example, in Chile and Colombia. And anti-imperialism discourse seems not to be enough as a reason to unify for them. As you see, we can see Chile and Colombia, they're being very critical to Russia, something that Venezuela would never be. So I would say that whatever is this new left, even though Colombia is retying with Venezuela right now, I don't believe that the Bolivarianism discourse, the unification of the Bolivarian in Latin America will be that strong. So that's the scenario. I completely overdid my time. I'm so sorry, and I'm done.
Thank you so much, Louisa. It's no problem at all. You overdid your time. It was really interesting. Thank you so much.
I took my water from here, so just need my papers.
So you want to sit? You want to sit there, maybe, so we can be.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, you can sit there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't mind.
Well, you're still there. Can you remove the bottle, please? Thanks, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you both so much for this great analysis. Latin America is very close to my heart. It's kind of my second home. My son is born in he's born in Brazil. He's half Peruvian. Venezuela was the first country I ever visited in Latin America, or the first Spanish-speaking country, 18 years ago, about 18, very long time ago. Yeah. And I think it's one of the big tragedies of Latin America, what happened in Venezuela in the past 2-3 decades. Thank you so much for the analysis. A lot of food for thought. I would love to give the word to the audience. Who wants to be the first one to ask a question? I'm sure you must have a lot. Come on, don't be shy.
Overwhelmed, but
Yes?
there was something said about the mining industry in Venezuela, but it wasn't clear for me which products they are mining right now, like next to oil. What are they investing into extract?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. So mostly I would say that, I mean, Venezuela has had a long history of mining extraction. I mean, mineral extraction has been since, you can go back to the 1940s, right, with iron ore, for example. But now, as Luisa was explaining very well, I mean, this shift and the decaying, so to speak, of the oil industry has made the Venezuelan administration, Venezuelan government, to turn into accelerate, in a way, extractivism of specific minerals, as I showed in one of the slides. I mean, gold primarily, but then you have others like coltan, I mean, copper. I mean, so it's a different type of minerals that in that specific area of Venezuela, in the Venezuelan Amazon, so to speak, right? So southern Venezuela, if you have an idea of the Venezuelan map, you see the Guyana, and then you have the Bolivar state and the Amazonas state, that are two states that are close to Brazil. I mean, the borders with Brazil and Colombia. So that specific, it's like a belt, so to speak, which is highly rich in different kind of minerals. So that's, in a way, with collaboration of, obviously, transnational companies that are doing most of the work. And then you have a lot of illegal mining, which is another huge problem. And also the participation of mafias and the military. That's also a very complex situation.
I think that is a main thing now is gold. What everybody's talking about is gold, especially Turkey. Turkey is massively buying Venezuelan gold. And what is very interesting is that it's the military, mostly, right?
Exactly.
The military is deep into just the mining, the gold sector. But what I hear is a lot of, that's maybe a question for me to you, is that Venezuela also wants to sell itself as this new resources like Bolivia and Chile are doing, because, right, we're talking about this green resources, whatever green they are, right? That we need to get out of oil, we need to continue extractivism, right? That's one of the topic that we have in our project, how green they actually are and what is their effect on society. And Venezuela seems to be promising. We also have them, hey, reduce our sanctions, look at us. But it's not going yet as deep as...
No, I mean, I don't think,
right?
I mean, it's in terms of lithium, for example, which is like the new oil, so to speak, right? Which people use for like battery, like, you know, the transition to electric vehicles, for example, right? Use a lot of lithium. Venezuela don't have, I mean, as far as I know, right? An important reserve of lithium. I mean, in comparison with Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, which is the lithium triangle, right? Yeah. It's highly rich in these specific resources. In the case of Venezuela, I would say that, as Lisa said, gold is I mean, there's a tradition, right, of mining gold in Venezuela. The thing is that it's a very like abrasive way of doing that type of extraction. It damages the environment a lot. It's a tricky thing. And again, as we said, it also involves it's not only an ecosystem problem, it's also a social issue. But yeah, I would say that. I mean, definitely. Lithium so far, I mean, as far as I can tell, I think in specific states in Venezuela, they have some like minor deposits, but it's not as, obvious as in Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia.
Do they have other mining resources that are important for the green energy shift that we need?
Yeah, well, I think coltan is one, and then you have... copper could be, I mean, then you have Chile, which is the biggest one.
Yes, Chile.
But there's another, which I only know in Spanish, rodio is the name. I'm sorry, I should have checked the name in English. Rhodium maybe? Rhodium? Yeah,
I think.
Okay, so that one is, Venezuela is marketing that one a lot. Like saying, okay, rhodium, it's an important component for the energy transition. Again, I think that the core of the issue here is, as Luisa pointed out, is that we're substituting oil extraction for other type of extractivism, which again, it's the core of the issue, and that's a problem that I think we should discuss from different disciplines. And
but that is an inconvenient truth, right? That we actually do need those mining resources for the green revolution to happen.
Exactly. Yeah, I read this article that Chile has managed to reach more than 30% of transition to solar and other type of clean energies, but at the same time the mining industries are taking advantage of that transition to keep mining. So that's it's a contradiction, right? I mean,
and you said that it's mainly the military mining, so that's military revenue. Then that's not state revenue that benefits society as a whole.
It's shady. That's in the end, that's what it is. It's shady. You see, also because of the crisis, for example, because of the crisis, you have to send the military to the borders. And by doing that, you increase their power, and then suddenly also they're connected to the economical sector more and more. But if you try to find out exactly the data and how is that going, especially because it is through a lot of it is through this logistic of sanction evasion. And then to find information, of course you find, but it's shady. It's not necessarily where these rents are ending. It's mostly on the pockets of the military, I would say, and other politicians that enable the military to have access. So I don't know if you have...
No, I totally agree. Again, it's not... the thing is that, institutions in Venezuela... as Luisa said, are it's very hard to get concrete data about what's happening. So it's not an easy question to answer because not even the government keeps track of that. And at least, maybe it does, but it's not publicly presented. So that's obviously an issue in transparency of the way as we were seeing in the Plan de la Patria, right? This eco-socialism. Again, that sounds like a contradiction in terms of, how ecological it is. And as I quoted the Ministry of Ecological Mining, which again is a contradiction to me, right? We're doing ecological mining, where you are basically, tracking the devastation and the deforestation of the Amazon in Venezuela from 2008, for example, until 2016, and there are maps that you can check on the internet, and you see how it's creating an important impact on the environment. So definitely, these are things that we need to discuss and we need to bring to the light in order to get more accountability. Also, accountability and environmental justice, right?
Yeah, those horrible scars in the landscape of Orinoco that you showed on the pictures.
Exactly.
Said it all.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you.
Who would like to pose another question?
What do you think about the potential of the cultural responses that you were referring to, or that you're studying? What is the potential to generate discussion and even change when we think about the relation between the human realm and the non-human? So, and the anthropocentrism, which actually is analyzed, which is on the basis of this extractivist logic, right? So we have to rethink that relation. And what do you think about the potential of cultural responses to generate a debate on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's obviously, and I hope it didn't come across that way. Art won't change, right, what's happening, but at least it's a way to make visible what is happening. And I think that's a really important potentiality embedded in artistic work. Ana Alenzo, she's a fantastic, artist that's been working about this for several years now. And if you Google her and you check the work she's been doing, you see how she's been tracking the evolution of the Orinoco mining arc, the Arco Minero del Orinoco. And it's a way to denounce, to make that visible. Again, I think it's a matter of make things visible. A couple of years ago, no one was talking about this, and this has been happening for years. And I'm not saying this is only, I think we have to say, the culprit is, the Maduro's administration or Chavez administration. It's been around since the 90s. I mean, it started in the 90s. So it's been like that for, like 40 years at least. The thing is, I believe that works like Alenzo, and there are a bunch of other Venezuelan artists that are working about this, and Latin American artists, obviously, that have, produce works of art and installations that address, again, the relationship with oil, the relationship we have with these specific minerals, and that makes us aware of these, connections we have with the non-human in a way. I mean, how many of the things we're doing, like using our cell phones and computers, are so entangled with nature. I think that's something worth to think about. It's even a pressing issue today, right? Because it seems like there's no turning back in terms of climate devastation. So I truly believe that these people have things to say, and if we pay attention to it, we can, think more, not clearly about it, but I think we can, at least give the situation a thought, and that's worth it. I think that's my opinion about it.
Louisa, would you like to add to that?
I don't know. I think you managed much better than everything I could say. But one question that I have also, like when it comes to Venezuela and Bolivia, but especially Venezuela, I think, because we are seeing, coming from Chile, especially Boric and Petro now, we are seeing at least becoming mainstream on the streets, anti-extractivist movements, right? It is more mainstream today. And when I look to Venezuela, I struggle to find it. And that's, of course, maybe is my macro brain that sometimes is a little harder to look to more details, but I'm struggling to find anti-extractivism movements coming to the core of Venezuela, and I would pinpoint, if I could have time to do that research, which I can't, but I would pinpoint one hypothesis, which is the connection of resource nationalism and anti-imperialism discourses, and the strength of anti-imperialism discourse, and this idea of resource nationalism, that our resource are ours and our own, petróleo es nuestro, tenemos que sembrarlo.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
But then that would be a question, would you see anti-extractivism movement rising in Venezuela beyond, like, of course we see in the arts, in the arts and in cultural manifestation, but more in like political level? Do we see it?
Yeah, it's not as visible, but the Observatorio de Ecología Política in Venezuela, the Political Ecology Observatory in Venezuela, is doing a lot of work about these with Emiliano Taramantovani, which is a Venezuelan sociologist. It's working a lot on these issues, and I think they are doing a fantastic effort to discuss like the wide range of issues that are related to extractivism. At the same time, and I want to just go back to what you were saying, because I agree with you 100%. I think it's embedded, this national extractivism, what I call the cultures of extraction. I think it's completely embedded in the social fabric of Venezuela and many other nations in Latin America that are so dependent on extractivism and the importation of the export of specific commodities. So I think it's a thing that we have to look at it very carefully because it, in a way, relates to like both a material and symbolic level, right? It's not an easy thing to detach, right, and say, well, okay, now people are posting that because people actually believe, okay, well, oil is what made us. As Liscano, this writer I quoted at the very beginning. If you ask what is, I'm from Venezuela. If you ask Venezuelans what is one of our main characteristics, oil. So it's interesting. And then you have Brazil. The name of the country is the name of a former commodity, pau Brasil, right? So, how a commodity defines the identity of a country is, it's fascinating, but at the same time, it's very scary because, you're 100% dependent on that. It's what makes you in a way. So that's... I just wanted to come back to that because I think, there are like connections between this national extractivism and the culture of extraction for sure, definitely.
Venezuela has had a very rough decade economically. Every trip I do to Latin America, I meet Venezuelan refugees everywhere. Earlier this year, I was covering migration topics in Guatemala, people illegally fleeing to the US, 60-70% of people I spoke to were Venezuelans. Do you think that has something to do with it too, that the material needs are just not filled in enough anymore to be worrying about post-material needs such as ecology?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. If you look into Venezuela, like for example, look at my perspective of comparatives, right? Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, two completely extreme countries. One of the main factors that you can differentiate that is Venezuela when it comes to capital resources and population distribution. It's still don't, even though it needs to have this gigantic, massive oil booms in order to actually have enough capital to distribute to enough society, different from countries like Saudi Arabia. So I would say that this construction idea of our oil, the oil money enters and you have this anti-cyclical phases of investment, we have to use it until it's over. So it does create a sense that it is the only income that we have, or those populations. But in the end, it doesn't have enough. If you stop to think about it, it does not. It's in terms of you become completely. It is a society that's completely dependent on the fluctuation of the prices, and when the prices stop coming in, the prices go down and the money start coming in. It's survival mode, right? This migration, what the migration was, of course, that is political persecution migration, but the massive amount of migration was economical needs. The people are escaping survival mode, like it's the first thing you do. You don't have the supply crisis were absurd. It was absurd, the supply crisis. I have friends that work in the border in Brazil, and it was a nightmare by 2015. So I would believe that to discuss if you ask those people right now what they want is that oil money just come back, right? It's not let's stop extracting oil. But of course, this mentality is slowly changing in countries that are maybe depending on other types of income. This discussion is easier to do. I saw that somebody on the back had a raising hand now.
Great.
Just saw it.
Yep.
Which are consuming these extracted commodities, or even worse, are also there on the ground extracting it together with state agencies and state companies. So I think when you put this into the picture, this demand for green capitalism or for anti-extractivism movements, then we have something else in the picture also too. And maybe these pressures for change in this chain might be also somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's an important remark, definitely. I mean, obviously, there's this fantastic, highly recommended book by Martín Arboleda, The Planetary Mind, right, which traces these connections in global capitalism, right? Which are the nations demanding these transitions, and which ones are the able to do that? The ones with money, and the ones that are, are buying these materials and resources. So I totally agree with you about that. It's not only a one-sided issue. I mean, this is even a colonial thing that's been around since the colonization of the Americas, which is it's a colonization of capitalism, basically, right? Which is the idea of going to this foreign land and extract as much as you can to, enrich nations. I mean, the British, Spain, even Belgium, participated in this. The reality is that, Latin America and Africa have played a big role in the development of Europe and the North, the global North. Let's just generalize a bit. And the role is basically, as Coronil says, again, in another fantastic book, which is mainly about Venezuela, but I'll say that if you talk about extractivism, you're talking about a global issue. It's a thing that it's threads, that are connecting several nations and countries and places and people. So you're 100% right about that. We cannot talk about this as an isolated issue. It's definitely
a system.
Yeah, it's a system, exactly.
Well, Well, it is part of the International Division of Labor.
Right, exactly.
It is impossible to discuss extractivism without discussing the chain of who is buying, where it's going. But if you look into, in terms of, well, when it comes to this discussion exactly of energy transition to what, right? Like we have been discussing, and that's one of the main outcomes that we are doing in our project. We already have we did already 2 panels on it that is called The Dark Sides of Sustainability. So we are discussing what is this idea of sustainability that we are discussing here on the North, and what does that mean for the Global South, and who are going to be the winners, the losers, and the new excluded. We are talking about an energy transition, and what is this energy transition? Who is going to have access? And in the end, it's the same problem over and over again, access to technology that will break the borders of this transformation. That I'm looking to all these projects, and while I would love to have a good perspective of it, none of the projects I'm looking, I see that the sectorial transformation is going to be broken, because in the end, who has the technologies are tiny conglomerates in Europe or United States or Canada, that they are the ones holding the ability of actually transforming this international division that we have of who exports what type of commodity and what type of product. And of course, there are some countries that did it, right? We see that did the transition, right? China is the biggest example, but we have South Korea and so on and so forth. But the main question is, what is going to be the new excluded on what we're talking? You mentioned lithium, right? We know that Bolivia is not going to be the biggest superpower of the world in a couple of years or a couple of decades. We know that that's not going to happen. It's because of access of technology and knowledge. It's not only having the product is not clearly enough, because look who are the oil countries, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, become like the provider of nature, which is basically the state. It's been like for 450 years, basically. Just to provide nature, right? Provide the nature, and then the others transform that into technology, whatever.
So we basically need, worldwide, we need a cultural shift, right? A shift away from this anthropocentric view of just using commodities, being superior to the earth. Do you kind of feel like we're already on that track? Can you also be positive, or not too much?
I don't think so, honestly. No, I mean, I would say that more than...
Sorry.
I mean, I think that more than the Anthropocene, I will side more with the concept of the Capitalocene. I think, capitalism, and it reinvents itself every time. I think that I'm not positive about things. I mean, we've seen that, during COVID, when basically everything stopped, there were some, like advancement, if you want to say it somehow, of, pollution was reduced in a way, and there were ways of stopping the way things are. But now, the levels of pollution and extraction are higher than before. So, even though, politicians and people that are in charge of making policies, which is basically what drives the world, gather up and make decisions, it never changes, right?
Do they?
Yeah, exactly. They get together and, talk about things, and in reality, what we see is that it doesn't change. Or if it changes, it just changes a very tiny percentage of the population of the world, whereas the rest.
Yeah. I would challenge that there is a cultural change.
Yeah.
I don't believe it's a cultural change, it's a systemic change. That's the only way of actually escaping the tragedy of our future is not cultural. I don't believe in individual change. I believe in structural change, systemic change, and once we don't challenge what is... I love the word, you just used it, but I never heard it before.
Which one?
Capitalocenic, how you said it?
The Capitalocene, yeah.
Capitalocenic. So until I do believe that the change is there, and not on the individual level. I believe in cultural ways as much as we try to individually level be more green. If we keep having a very capitalistic-centric approach to development and to economic progress, we will just change the resources. That's my perception. And
I would just add that maybe, culture, I see it more in a collective approach. I think we share ideas and connections, and I think it's not only like individuals. So I think like maybe a cultural systemic definitely, but I think culture and the culture which as Latin Americans, you and I sitting here, I know we share the background of enduring, even though if you don't like believe that directly, the social dismemberance of our countries, right? I mean, in the case of Venezuela, Brazil, where you have inequality, which is so high, and we see that every day. I mean, we grew up with that. So in a way, that's, in a sense, we have that cultural background. And I think that, collectively we can, speak together. And this sounds like very, but at the same time, I think it's important to sort of acknowledge that it's also systemic and cultural, at least from my side. Yeah.
I have 5 more questions in mind, and I'm sure you
There's
do too. We're already
there.
over time, but we'll do one last question then. Yes, sir.
Well, just for Luisa, because I have the feeling that Chica more or less had a feeling about the future of Latin America, and because I'm Colombian, so I would like to know your opinion about Chile and Colombia. You mentioned they have a very slight different social movement now in the presidency?
Honestly, well, as Brazilian, I am a well of negativity right now. Kind of hard after 2 days ago. So I'm still hangover of the depression of that election. But let's say in a sense that Chile and Colombia brought some hope. I would say that. And it's a different hope that maybe Brazil will bring. Brazil is not a hope. Brazil is like, let's return to the old guys and please let's stop the mess. And I would say the same thing what happened with Argentina, with the left in Argentina right now. It is a let's just stop down the hold of the conservative wave. I think Chile and Colombia are much more hopeful. Chile, the problem was wanting to do unfortunately, societal change, cultural change, through revolutions is kind of hard, and through constitutional change people thought that was going to be better. But when it comes to regional scenario, what I tried to present was, I think that when it comes to regionalism, that wave that we saw on during the pink tide, right? This UNASUR, South-South, this leadership, regional integration leadership, I don't see it. I see it's going to be weakened because the lefts that are rising, as we saw in Chile, they have a lot to tackle domestically. Their legitimacy is 50-50. That means it can tip to the other side very quickly. So to risk political engagement too much with the region is complicated. I think now people, when it comes to Venezuela, people are putting a lot of bets on Colombia, being an actor to negotiate the crisis. Honestly, can be a good step, but I don't believe that it's going to have too much changes, and it's not going to be a hopeful moment that it was before in terms of integration. And whatever it is, this conservative wave that rises in Brazil, that rises in Argentina, it's even rising in Uruguay. It's a state. It will stay. And whatever Boric does, this was a stab on the back, losing the way he lost the constitution. It was too high, the percentage of people that voted against. So I think it's going to be very pragmatic and not much ideational. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry for my negativity here. I hate being the negative person, but I have my faith that Petro and Boric can do good change, but not necessarily in terms of regional yet. If they get re-elected, maybe. You have to always consolidate first. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any other more positive standing?
Yeah, no, actually,
Please.
I don't have much. I was trying to, be the positive one. But no, I see that way too, man. I think it's gonna stay that way.
Your negativity is forgiven.
I'm so sorry.
Both of your countries endured a lot in the last decade. I perfectly understand.
Yeah, it's complicated.
We're already 10 minutes over time, so sadly enough, I think we have to leave it here. The second session on October 11th will reflect on communitarian feminism facing violence in Guatemala and Mexico. So please come back next week. And
Sure,
then,
that's going to be more positive. I'm sure the revolution would be female. Listen, what I'm saying, it's better. It would be better than talk about oil.
I was in both these countries half a year ago, and they have a very long way to go in this movement. So let's hope it's positive. And the last session on October 20th will focus on political activism of women during the massive protests in Chile in 2019. Maybe that one will be more positive.
It will end on the right way.
Exactly. There we go. So hopefully we will see you back here, same time, same location, right? People who are watching at home, I would recommend you to come here next time. It's nice here, cozy, it's warm, it will save you on your energy bills. Important these days. Thank you so much, Gianfranco Selgas, Luisa Serioli, and the University of Ghent. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Se está bañando en las orillas de un río. Mis ojos la están mirando, pero es de un amigo mío. Yo no quisiera mirarla, pero no tengo la culpa. Se parece una esmeralda con flores de chupa chupa. Que yo le avise a mi amigo, muy difícil me resulta. Yo no quisiera mirarla, pero no tengo la culpa. Se parece una esmeralda con flores de chupa chupa. Que yo le avise a mi amigo, muy difícil me resulta. Allí hay un caimán cebao que mide más de una cuadra, con más cachos que un venado y más dientes que 20 babas. Ella, inocente de todo, se baña sin percatarse que cuando llegue al recodo el caimán puede acercarse, y yo solo en la barra